And we're live for episode 6 of 2023. And it's an absolute pleasure to welcome back my friend, my brother, Richard de Kok. And oh gosh, I've advanced the slides. I just can't get it right. There's always something that I do wrong in these sessions.
That's you can't
Welcome,
get it
Richard.
right, but that's the name of your company. Get it right. Come on, Johan.
Yeah. So, what have you been up to, Richard?
Keeping myself out of trouble mostly. All sorts. It's been a busy time. So I'm, as you know, mostly helping customers onboard onto the cloud, helping them with a lot of the decision making that they have to make with regards to some critical decisions and moving to the cloud, how they resource it, how they design their operating models, how they relook at their strategy and the way they currently do things. So I thought it would be appropriate to talk about, well, within innovation, within problem solving, decision making is a really, really important part in getting that right. And I thought it'd be something interesting to discuss today.
Yeah. So I mean, it's easy to come up with ideas. As we all know, not all ideas are good ideas, and not all good ideas are actually feasible and workable. So, and that's where many people, I think, get despondent when we say we need to innovate, and then all of a sudden we start making decisions around that, and it just doesn't pan out. So, how do we make good decisions about innovation? Is there sort of a framework or a checklist or something that you can start with? What are the things that you need to keep top of mind when you make decisions like this? I just see that I'm very white. We've got, for the audience who don't know what load shedding is, if your electricity provider don't have enough power, they cut you off power for a period of the day. So I'm sitting with a very, very intense white LED light at the moment. That I'm using because I don't have my normal light. So apologies for the white forehead.
So you still look beautiful, Johan. Don't worry.
Thank you.
I think there are so many ways to skin a cat, and I don't think there is a particular right or wrong way to do this. But I think that there are some common sense guidelines that would be helpful that I thought we could go over. I mean, I'll bring up some frameworks that I think have been beneficial in shaping my thinking around how to approach decision making within, especially the construct of innovation. I think it may have been called out in previous sessions that you've had. I know that you called it out in your wonderful publication, which I hold very closely over here. But
okay, now you're showing everybody that you've got a false background.
Yeah, well,
because you just ripped it out of the wall.
All smoke and mirrors. I pulled it out of the wall. So you called it out in here. Defining innovation, I think, is such a very important first step. And being clear on what do we mean by innovation? Because is that continual improvement? Is it, when is it continual improvement? When is it innovation? Because the two need to be managed differently. The decisions you make are going to be very different between decisions you make around innovation, because you're doing new radical things in that space where and so a lot more investment, a lot more risk. Whereas in continual improvement, your risk is far less. You're doing more of an evolutionary change, but then you're thinking ahead over many iterations. Needs to, you constantly need to be looking back and ahead and looking back and ahead to ensure that things are progressing in the direction that you want them to progress in. So that first step of defining what we mean by innovation, I think, is really important. And I can't give you a definition because I think it's unique to every organization. It's about just sitting down and saying, right, how do we define, what will we define innovation as? I think the book, Getting Jobs Done, is it's a free book. online. If you search for it, you'd find it. I think that's a remarkably good book in providing a starting point for a definition. And I think what I liked about it is it goes against the premise of innovation being about creating ideas and very much ad hoc. What's the word I'm looking for? Serendipitous, where you'll hit one luckily and many are just wasted. And it looks at it more from a scientific process perspective. So if you're going to manage innovation, you need to be very scientific about it and very standardized and do it in a very repeatable way. And I gravitate towards that because it's better use of resources and time, etc. Anyway, defines it great there, but that would be the first step.
Okay, so I mean, what we did in ADAPT, we said there's essentially 5 types of innovation. We can group them into 3 things that's quite radical and quite often fail. Things we do to make our customers love us. So that's sort of product improvement, continual improvement. Yes, it can be innovative. And then the things that we do in the background to make the organization more responsive and behaving better and providing better quality service towards our customers. So unlocking value. And you're quite right. Those 3 things have very distinctly different approaches that's necessary, especially the last one. If you're talking about what Christensen talked about, efficiency innovation, that's the lean and agile, the lean and lean Six Sigma stuff, which is innovative because solving problems. I mean, what is innovation? It's solving a problem for a customer, isn't it, or for somebody at least?
Yeah.
So first of all,
it could also be finding a new way of producing something at an exceptionally lower cost and lower use of resources.
So
it results in positive impact for the customer, but it's also different elements that you could throw at it.
A good strategy in that space could be something like software as a service. Essentially, you didn't change what you're doing; you're just delivering it differently, and all of a sudden it opens up all kinds of other doors. Okay, so first point is we need to say what is innovation, and I want to add to that what type of innovation are we busy dealing with? Then what?
Exactly. Then I think, I find it's really puzzling. And I like a good puzzle, and I haven't quite cracked the reason behind why as yet. But I'd say a good majority of the time, I lose sight of it as well. But many people that I'm engaged with, not having a deep, intimate understanding of their objectives of the organization, what the outcomes are. If you're making decisions about innovation, and such a broad statement to make. What is a decision in innovation? It could be, do we invest money into this? Could we do this in a different way? What's the ramifications of that? What's the trade-offs of that? Those kinds of decisions, right? If we're making those in a vacuum outside of, what the objectives of the organization are, then, we tend to be creating things that are very often not really aligned to the impact that we're hoping to have. And interestingly, I mean, this is obviously, we're talking about large organizations where they've got multiple different environments, and just trying to get things to keep quiet here. I don't know why that didn't close earlier. Sorry. When we're talking about multiple environments, multiple departments, we just, I think in the business of the day, lose sight of the fact that when we're making decisions, we need to be almost every day coming in and reminding ourselves about what are the objectives of this organization? What are the sub-objectives that have aligned to meeting those objectives? And how is every decision that I'm making aligned to driving those forward? Because where that becomes important is the placement of resource and time and focus. If we're in the cloud, in the tech industry, we are presented with thousands of opportunities on a daily basis on how we could be approaching things in a different way and doing new things. And there's AI, which has got so much promise, and there's going to be thousands of different efforts and innovations and workloads that are going to spin up from that in organizations on doing things differently. And we can just find ourselves drowning in a whole lot of different initiatives that result in very little tangible impact on a customer at the end of the day. All nice, fluffy, frilly stuff, maybe. And of course, we could completely change the way we interact with our customers as well, through that kind of technology and others. But without that clear laser focus on those anchoring objectives that have, there's already been a significant amount of decision making gone into just crafting. That's what we are going to focus on for the following reasons. So now every decision you make there on out, and make sure everyone's making aligned to those, is being clear on that when you're making your decisions. What's the trade-off going to be if I invest time and resource or do things differently in this new way versus what the outcomes we're trying to achieve from an organizational mind, immediate sort of division? How do those trade-offs work?
So would you then agree to say, first of all, we need to have a single North Star, and then everything that we do needs to connect to that. It may cascade to a division or a customer or a whatever, but there's always that guardrail of, this is who we are, this is why we're here, this is what we're trying to achieve.
It's a sanity check more than anything else. Like, not saying you need to go out and map out all the OKRs throughout the organization. Like, it's a movement I'm not entirely sure I'm 100% behind, but and I'm just talking about just simple little printout of the 4 or 5 objectives of your organization. If they're real fluffy, make them a little bit more meaningful and impactful for the level of granularity that's needed. Like, I don't say go and create a framework around it. Just, you need some thinking anchorage to make sure that your decisions are being prioritized. It helps the thinker, the decision maker, make those decisions more effective because they've got more of a tactical and strategic awareness of what they're doing at that time. It takes a lot of the noise out of that decision making process.
Yeah. The reason why we're smiling is there's this whole new brand of consultants that's running around and creating OKRs.
Yes.
Often in isolation, with very little consultation. Yeah, and I think you're quite right. The better thing to do is have a few broad strokes that you can use as guardrails, and that you can always say, if this is the why, does the how make sense? Yeah,
exactly. It alleviates a lot of that, and very often you find you start pursuing meaningful outcomes and initiatives. I've been trapped. I've been caught out with this time and time again. You get so caught up in a great idea and a great thing, and you spend a lot of time and effort fleshing it out and putting effort into it, building it up, and it adds value, but it doesn't have the impact that you were sort of anticipating because maybe it just wasn't quite aligned to those objectives. And the interesting thing is, another discussion point would be, could you come up with an innovative idea that would actually add or change those organizational strategic objectives? And I'd argue that's a great consideration when you're running through that, to say, oh, well, it doesn't align to those, but wait a minute, maybe this is something radical. Maybe this is something that could absolutely change that. And at that point, I see an organization as a cascade of decision making, where different individuals have got different contexts around different situations. A department head's going to have a very good contextual oversight around what happens in their remit of control and just around them as well. When you look at sort of your shareholders, they're making decisions and so forth based on completely different criteria and objectives. So they'll define these objectives, and everyone's making all these decisions that are related to their remit of control, their span of and scope. So when you do come across something that could have that impact, it's about bringing that decision up that line against the appropriate sponsor to be able to say, right, well, would you agree that this is something that would influence this level of objective versus creation of a new one, for argument's sakes. And this is all nice and easy stuff. It's not. It's just as simple as I said, printing it out, just a day-to-day guideline. And when you come across something that could add to the organizational objective or your departmental objective or your the IT department or a business unit, whatever, it's meeting with those appropriate people to get that alignment and that agreement on the outcomes you're trying to go for with this innovation, whether or not they agree that yes, let's add a new outcome there or whatever else. If you kind of get the flow of where I'm going with that.
Yeah.
Because I think the other thing that flows into is great. No, carry on.
No, I think you said two important words now. Now I forgot them. So go for it.
Going back on the recording.
We're going to go back on the recording. So the other thing is?
The other thing that is drastically lacking that I'm finding in my walk of life is the painful, tragic lack of empirical decision making. We don't seem to make any decisions based on factual, hard knowledge or hard data, should I say? When I go and challenge people on their decisions and so forth, it's very much just intuition and gut, which is really important. But that empirical nature of decision, like having proper data driving empirical decision making is, I think, becoming more of an important thing than ever, especially when we start to rely on things like ChatGPT to just decide on what our organizational objectives should be. And I say that, I say that as a joke, but it's, we get to that point where it's like, well, what should we be doing? And then curates a whole lot of great stuff for you. If we just trust everything, and it goes for I see disconnect between on the ground versus management every single day. So managers are making key decisions around the direction of things without the evidence and the data of what's actually happening on the ground. Changing teams, changing structures when they don't have the resource to, drive this new objective, and they haven't hired, and so people just get spread more thinly and deal with it. But you're getting a very suboptimal kind of, very little governance, very little cross checks in place to make sure things are running the way they are, and things start slipping through the cracks, right? So that empirical decision making as part of that. So when you're looking at innovation, like how are you measuring innovation? When you define when you've defined an innovation, what are the success metrics? How are you going to measure the outcome of that? And when you look at the process of every time you do this, how many times do you meet your outcomes? Why? Are we asking the why question enough times as to why we're not creating many impacting, why our innovations aren't returning the return on investment we keep stating they're going to have? Is it an educational problem, or are our current calculators and so forth maybe incorrect? So data is so important, and it's just neglected in a time that we need it more than ever.
Yeah, I had this very conversation with an executive at the bank yesterday, where there's sort of this approach. Okay, but we've given the budget for this project, so just go and make it happen. Whether all of the other things that's necessary to make it happen are real, in place, available, is immaterial. So I mean, having a little checklist is not a bad idea. And I'm not saying live your life by checklists. But for God's sake, if you want to start doing things, at least make sure that you can be successful.
Well, this is the thing: is every organization that I run into and that I see an innovation process around, no one goes back to validate the return on investment. So we're just funneling stuff through, but we're not taking a step back to evaluate whether or not that return on investment was achieved. And so what we're just taking everything on. Again, that's going to lead to spreading your scarce resources very thinly. because you've also not looked at the key objectives, and you haven't taken all those things into consideration. So you've got all this noise drawing away from the core of your business, your customers' actual requirements, the things that they see value in your services. But all this noise gets generated that literally makes you blind to the things that could indeed have impact, or help you identify the kinds of metrics or checks that you should be putting in place to get rid of a lot of the noise that's coming through, and through that empirical process of checking in and seeing where things aren't working, you're slowly refining your ability to be really good at innovation and problem solving. And it's just something I would love to see companies spending. It's not major time, it's not major effort, it is a couple of cool tools you use, like cost of delays, again, being aware of you're understanding deeply understanding your business objectives and aligning things to that, looking at what does success look like, what are the metrics we're going to measure success from for each initiative, how they align to those outcomes and those objectives, how do they pin up against our customers' requirements. So are we using personas to see how these impact our customers, and those kinds of things. So, and yeah, cool, so we put a persona up, but do we go and do a data check on whether or not that did achieve that value for that customer at the end as well? So these are all really important, not that complex things to put in place to try and improve decision making and innovation. The other important thing is, the most important thing, well, one of the most important things, everything for me is the most important thing, being aware of mental biases in your decision making process. Things like groupthink, neglect of probability, so disregarding the probability of outcome of events, outcome bias, so judging a decision based on its eventual outcome instead of what that decision means today. There's a bunch of books on mental models and these biases, and just becoming more familiar with them helps you combat that thinking, when you're going through and making these decisions as teams. And there's good simple techniques to break this bias through that process as well. So those are all sort of the most important elements of effective decision making within innovation and problem solving that I think, if we started to embrace basic simple aspects of it and mature it over time, you should start to see some massive changes in the success that you're having.
Yeah, it makes me think of, I bought a book the other day. The title is The One Big Thing. Every chapter is one big thing.
Sounds like a
book what's amazing?
I should have written, should I say?
Yeah, so what's amazing for me is that if, as you talk, I'm saying to myself, okay, Hoshin Kanri and Lean, transparency, inspection, and adaptation in Scrum. So I mean, these progressive, I mean, they don't actually not that progressive, because I mean, Lean is what, 70 years old, 60 years old, 70 years old.
Johan, the more
and we still haven't learned.
The more I read up about Lean, I mean, I've read it. Obviously we've both gone through it very intimately, and it's as applicable today more so than it ever was, and none of the principles have changed. It's not manufacturing, but it's the essence is indeed there. It's Lean's amazing, and we probably always need to keep going back to it because of the fact that there's so much noise out there, and there's all these great things. So how do we just focus on the essential things?
Yeah,
I mean that. So, funny final point, and I love this story. Lean emerged from Toyota. Why did it emerge? Because Toyota couldn't compete against the big car manufacturers of the time. They had nothing, and so they had to be very, 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 very careful with the way they used their resources. And the Toyota production system was born, and they had a massive, Lean essentially came from that, and other practices, but it all came from the fact that the underdog didn't have what was needed to compete, and just by really getting to the basics and sticking with the basics, you can compete better than most out there.
Yeah, and we talked about cascading decisions. So That's Ocean Connery
Lean
going
concept.
from top to down. And we talked about measuring what you do if it is what you need to do and if it aligns. Okay, that's Ocean Connery, bottoms up. I mean, it's, to my mind, one of the most overlooked lean tool sets. Is this whole idea of policy cascades. I don't know why they chose the word policy though, because I don't see it as policy. But in any case, the direct
I think
translation
back then it was probably the context that are
is,
different.
yeah, probably.
Yeah, different.
Yeah, but there's some awesome stuff. Okay, so I always tell people now, people are going to get sick and tired of the story. The very first Get It that I did was with David Cannon. It was nearly 3 hours. And then people say to me, "No, you're overdoing it." So for the last 2 years, I've been doing an hour. But this year, I'm trying to lean it down to just 30 minutes. Yeah, that's enough time for you to listen to the podcast on the treadmill or on the spinning bike, yeah, in the morning when you go and do the exercise. So
Yeah, you'd have
let's
with if you were listening to you and David Cannon, you'd end up becoming a marathon runner within a week.
yeah. So give us 5 good decisions that you need to make before you say, let's go and do this innovative thing. Okay. And you can summarize. You don't have to come up with new stuff. Yeah.
Sure. So it would firstly be, have we defined innovation? What category of innovation does this fall under? Is it an innovation? Right.
Yeah.
And what category does it fall under? Second thing would be, does it align to any of our strategic objectives, either at an organizational level or at a departmental level, whatever the context is that you are applying that, right? So can we put resourcing in it? Does it align with what we're trying to achieve? The third one is, what's the success criteria? So if this is successful, how will we measure its success? And maybe tail dove that a bit, maybe it's a fourth one, but because it's not always that clear, but really, if you can, what customer requirements is this addressing or changing or influencing?
I think that's important enough to make it the fourth one.
Fine. Then I'm going to give you more than 5 then.
Okay, that's
the next
fine.
one is how would be, checking in, or has there been any mental bias involved in the decision, right? So just a quick check, because in the workshop and however we did this, what potential mental biases might be clouding our judgment or making us look at things differently. Do we have the right are we rushing to solve a problem before fully assessing the situation?
Okay.
And
so that's the data thing.
Well, it just that was the one I'm getting at. Do we have the right data?
Okay.
To validate whether or not this is the right decision to be making, and what other data do we need before we can agree that this is the thing to do? And that's beyond what's the success criteria. It's like, well, we've done information gathering to determine whether or not this is a good idea, so we have to make sure we're doing our fact checks to ensure that it is. We very often say, yeah, that's gonna increase our revenue by 15%. Okay, well, what data do we have that led us to that assumption? What data should we be using to validate that assumption is actually a good assumption, or if it's just someone sitting there very optimistically with their outcome bias, going for that idea. So yeah, those would be, I think, a couple of good starters.
So the summary for me of all of the stuff that you said is, yes, we think intuition, or no, we know intuition is a good thing when we innovate, but it can be our greatest enemy. There must always be hard facts, whether those hard facts are goals and objectives, outcomes, customer requirements, The fact that we've got the resources to do it with, yeah, all of those are determinants of innovation success. It's not only about this good idea, and then we run off, chasing
And
our own tails sometimes.
yeah, and I'm an advocate that we shouldn't be going out and generating ideas in mass and just collecting ideas. I think that the jobs to be done framework is really put a good case against that idea. Yeah, I think you need to go and evaluate things properly, or else you're going to just overload yourself with meaningless
I
work.
remembered one of the comments that I wanted to make. You said we must create the personas. I stopped using personas for this specific reason, is because nobody goes and validates that persona is actually real.
Exactly.
So it's just something else that's imagined. And then we start running off on a tangent and building stuff for something that doesn't exist. It's an imaginary friend.
I don't want to take up unnecessary time, because I know I could probably go on about this quite a lot.
No,
We're
that's
getting
fine.
into our philosophical debate again, Johan, but I think we're getting into a world where what is real is a tangible, important question to be asking you as an individual. Like, did we go to the moon? Did we really go to the moon? Were you there? Now, I know I believe we went to the moon, right? So I'm not one of these people who feel like the moon is a mothership.
But staged, or whatever.
But the point is, we are rapidly approaching a world, and I hope that regulations come in to prevent it, but we are getting to a point where you can't trust your eyes, you can't trust your ears, and so how do you validate that actual fact versus deep fake versus all these other things, the propaganda or whatever else? And I don't see this as a conspiracy theorist in any sense. I'm not that I'm not that kind of a person. But when you're in an organization and people have a desire to pursue certain things out of excitement and so forth, they will come up with a lot of really convincing material to suggest you take a course of action. How do you, as a decision maker, you need to find pressure points to be able to hone in on, to really get the truth out of things and look at the world of what is real, what is fact. Because unless you're there in the room hearing that conversation with the customer, you can't really take what you're hearing as factual. Then that goes to that persona situation. I've seen how many people go out and create personas. A couple of cool interviews, and I use the word cool in a derogatory sense. I didn't mean it as such. Going interviewing people, coming back with a representation of a mass segment of users, etc. And while that's useful as a guideline, it doesn't necessarily speak to the actual problems and jobs that need to be done by these individuals and the actual innovation that could occur with them. And this is the challenge with management making some decisions and other departments making decisions on behalf of a user group, because they don't work with them in that department, right? So they'll never fully have an intimate understanding unless they scientifically go in with empirical data and really try and investigate the work that they're doing to identify, oh, okay, so that's what this persona means. These are the data points around that persona. Oh, it's a lead time. It takes them 4 weeks to get something out. Well, that for me is fact. Okay, so how can we reduce that? Is that something we should be reducing? There's great frameworks, simple frameworks like jobs to be done. And I'm not getting commission on jobs to be done. It is just really a great, simple, very pragmatic guide to get going. The book that you've written on competing in a digital future, Johan's got so much good, rich things on it. Exactly. It's definitely worth investigating it, because it's going to help you get a lot more clarity on that journey. And decision making is not an easy thing to do when you're surrounded by a lot of noise and a lot of false information.
But I think those 6 or 7 things that you've basically just gave us now is some really good pointers for organizations. Just before I say goodbye, I think it was 2001 that Bill Gates said, if you can touch it, it's not real. And boy, oh boy, lately,
it's not real.
Yeah, boy, oh boy, lately, wow, was that a prophecy?
If you touch it, it's not real.
If you can't touch it.
Oh, if you can't touch it.
Now, if you can touch it, it's not real.
That one's over my head. I don't get it.
Everything
If you
is
can
fluffy
touch
and
it, it's not
virtual,
real.
Yeah.
Eh?
Yeah. So the surreal, the virtual is becoming more real as the real than the real. Yeah.
Yeah. It is a concern. It's a big concern that I have.
Anyway, once again, sir,
We'll do a chat on that one day.
such a pleasure. We should, yeah. I'm actually thinking of starting a sideline conversations that's a little bit more esoteric. Don't know if that would be a good thing for my image or not. But had a lot of fun. Thank you, Richard.
You as well, Johan. Thanks for having me again.
Just let me just put the big screen on again. I hope this contact information is correct. So if anybody wants to have a chat to Richard, I just sometime during the conversation I found it quite amusing because he's starting to develop a American accent working in the UK.
I work a lot with my friends across the duck pond, as we refer to it.
Okay, cool. Richard, once again, thanks to Stack. Thanks for taking your time and sharing your wisdom with us. And everybody who's listening to this, thanks for listening also. Goodbye.
Thanks, Jan. Bye.